Welcome in, everyone. Ready to dive right in. Today, we're looking at January 6th.
Big topic.
Huge. And we're not just looking at the day itself, but everything that led up to it,
Like that butterfly effect thing?
Exactly, the butterfly effect. Those seemingly small things that had massive consequences. That's what we're unpacking.
And it's fascinating how significant January 6th has become in the whole scheme of American history. Really shows you how fragile things are.
Absolutely. And that's what's so compelling about the essay we're looking at today, how it forces us to hit rewind to really understand the events of January 6th.
It's not just about that one day.
Right. Like the essay points out, even the 2020 election cycle, it was a pressure cooker. Everything felt so high stakes.
The essay paints quite a picture of the country at the time. The polarization was intense. People were distrustful. Certain groups felt completely alienated.
Like all the ingredients for disaster were already in the mixing bowl.
Yeah, it really makes you think.
And this essay doesn't hold back. It names names, specifically pointing to Donald Trump and his allies, especially in the weeks after the election.
It was a crucial period.
Yeah, and they kept pushing this narrative of a stolen election. And just to be clear, the essay explicitly says those claims were found to be baseless, but
that doesn't erase the impact.
Exactly. So how can something be demonstrably false but still have such a huge effect?
That's the core issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can't just erase something from people's minds because it's been debunked, especially when it comes to something like an election.
People get very passionate about those.
Absolutely, and people were already primed to be skeptical, so when you add in social media algorithms and those right-wing media outlets, plus the conspiracy theories, like QAnon.
That's like a recipe for disaster.
It really is. It created this breeding ground for misinformation and manipulation. Like a game of telephone where the original message gets so distorted that people latch onto something completely different than what was originally said.
It shows you how important it is to be wary of what you see and hear, but the essay also says it wasn't just rhetoric, there were institutional failures too.
Right. The essay argues that if there had been a stronger response from other leaders, things might have played out differently.
Especially within the Republican Party.
Yeah, and that's the point the essay really hits home. How many Republicans either stayed silent or even backed up what Trump was saying?
Which obviously just made things worse.
Definitely. And at the same time, you've got social media companies being slow to react, not really grasping the gravity of the situation.
And law enforcement agencies too, they should be impartial, there to protect everyone. But they were criticized for not being prepared for potential violence.
And that lack of action, the essay argues, that's what really emboldened the people who were buying into the false narrative.
It's a lot to think about our own responsibility, not just as individuals, but also as part of these big institutions. But let's shift gears a bit, talk about the rioters themselves. The essay tries to understand what motivated them, saying their goal was to stop the Electoral College vote from being certified, basically prevent Biden from taking office.
Right, to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power.
Exactly, but then it gets interesting because the essay also says a lot of those rioters believe they were defending democracy.
Which seems contradictory.
Completely. So how do you even begin to reconcile those two things?
It is a paradox, isn't it? How can you try to overturn an election but believe you're defending democracy at the same time?
It's mind-boggling.
But the essay, it argues that it's this weird kind of mental disconnect when you've got a charismatic leader, a ton of misinformation, and people who are already feeling resentful.
Put those ingredients together.
It's a recipe for trouble. And history is full of examples where this kind of thinking leads to bad places.
Really makes you think. And it underscores that democracy is something you have to constantly be working at, nurturing it, protecting it, so it doesn't slip away.
It's not a given.
Definitely not. But I want to shift gears a little bit to the aftermath of January 6th, what the essay says about the fallout.
Okay.
What were your thoughts on how it handles both the immediate consequences and then the longer term ones?
Well, the essay doesn't shy away from the immediate devastation at all. It talks about the deaths, the injuries, the trauma people experienced.
It was a very traumatic day for a lot of people.
For sure. And it also talks about how the world saw it, how it damaged America's image as this beacon of democracy.
Yeah, definitely not a good look.
Not at all. And then you have the political consequences, like Trump's second impeachment and all the rioters facing charges.
Hundreds of them.
It felt like the country was in shock, trying to understand what had just happened.
Trying to process it all.
Exactly. But the essay argues that the worst fallout from January 6th wasn't all that immediate chaos.
It was the stuff that came later.
Right, the longer-term consequences. It talks about how the event made the divisions in American society even worse.
Because we were already pretty divided.
We were. And the essay even cites a study that shows how much distrust between Democrats and Republicans increased after the riot.
It's like we're living in two separate realities.
It often feels that way, and the essay also points to this rise in political extremism on both sides.
Which is concerning.
Very, because it's like people are digging their heels in even more, less willing to have a conversation and find common ground.
Like they've already made up their minds and that's it.
And you can't help but wonder, did January 6th set a dangerous precedent? Could we see something like this happen again?
Those are the big questions, aren't they?
They are, and the essay doesn't pretend to have all the answers.
But it definitely makes you think.
It does, and it reminds us that democracy is not a spectator sport. It's not something you just watch from the sidelines.
You have to be an active participant.
You have to be vigilant, willing to stand up for those democratic principles, even when it's hard.
Even when it's uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And going back to the butterfly effect idea, it really makes you wonder about those missed opportunities, those points where things could have gone differently.
What if? Right.
What if social media companies had been quicker to stop the misinformation from spreading? What if more leaders had condemned the violence right away?
What if they hadn't stayed silent?
Exactly. We can't change the past, but it's definitely something to think about.
It really is, because it shows that even seemingly small actions can have a huge impact.
Absolutely. And it makes you think about your own role in all of this. Because if we could be part of the problem, we can definitely be part of the solution too.
It's a lot, thinking about all of this, but I do appreciate that the essay doesn't leave you feeling totally hopeless.
Yeah, it's not all doom and gloom.
Right, like there's this cautious optimism there, this feeling that even though things went really wrong, it's not too late to fix them.
Exactly. The essay acknowledges the dangers of January 6th, but it also says we have choices to make.
We're not powerless.
Not at all. We can learn from what happened and actually choose a different way forward as individuals and as a country.
And it goes back to that butterfly effect, right? If those little actions or even inactions had such a huge impact.
It makes you think.
It does, because it means our choices can make a positive difference too.
For sure. And what really stuck with me was how much the essay emphasized individual responsibility.
Taking ownership.
Yeah, because it's not enough to just acknowledge that democracy is fragile. We have to actually do something to make it stronger.
So what can we do on a daily basis,
Well, it starts with ourselves. Looking at our own biases, being willing to have tough conversations with people, even when we disagree, and being really critical of the information we're taking in.
Doing our own fact-checking.
Exactly, because we're not just passive observers in all of this. We can actually shape what's happening.
Have you ever fact-checked something before sharing it online, or questioned something a friend or family member shared?
Oh, all the time.
It's those little things that can actually make a difference.
Totally, and it's bigger than just our own personal circles. It's about holding our leaders accountable, demanding transparency, supporting policies that strengthen our institutions, that kind of thing.
Because if we don't, who will?
Right, there's that quote. I think it was Edmund Burke who said it. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing.
Powerful stuff.
It is. And It makes you think about the institutions we rely on to protect democracy, like the media.
They play a huge role.
They do. They're supposed to be providing accurate information, holding people in power accountable. But January 6th really showed us what happens when misinformation runs wild.
It's scary to think about.
It is, and we need a media that values truth over sensationalism,
Absolutely, and it's not just the media. We need a justice system that's fair to everyone, regardless of their political beliefs, and elected officials who actually uphold the Constitution, even when it's tough.
It's about our institutions living up to the values they're supposed to represent.
It's a tall order, for sure.
It is, but as we've seen, the alternative is way too risky.
Absolutely. January 6th was a wake-up call, a stark reminder that we can't take democracy for granted.
We have to work at it.
Every single day, not just when it's time to vote. And this deep dive has been quite the journey, hasn't it?
It has. It's a complex topic.
It is, and we've covered a lot of ground, from the historical context to the choices that led to that day. But I think the most important thing is that we've really been forced to examine our own roles in all of this.
As citizens of a democracy.
Exactly, and if this conversation has sparked your curiosity, if you want to explore these ideas further, we encourage you to check out the essay we've been discussing. Keep the conversation going.
There's always more to learn.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.